Hi, Catherine.
Hello, Angela. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good.
It's so good to see you.
Oh, same.
Well, I want to jump right in because you've been a long champion of creatives and creative talent with your portfolio creative company that you founded, gosh, 20, how many years
20 years
ago?
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, how does your personal experience as a creative yourself influence your professional?
Well, I've always had as long as I remember, I've always had a passion for art and drawing. As a young kid, I would draw all the time, pads of paper, make things out of, shoe boxes and cardboard boxes and all that sort of stuff. And found myself chasing a career in art. So I did get into BFA in drawing. But as most people know, you can't necessarily get a job in drawing. So I was able to parlay into marketing and advertising because I did have a background, I guess like a second major, if you will, minor in computer-aided design, which is what it was called back then. And it was really just a Macintosh, only one Macintosh in the computer lab that all the art kids got to use. And I got into my marketing career, my advertising career, by being the only candidate at the time that knew how to use a Macintosh. So I did that for 15 years, and then that passion just kind of continued to grow. I moved around a lot, and then this opportunity came up where somebody else wanted to start this staffing and recruiting business that was all marketing based. And I'm like, well, you know what? I really know how to get a job in marketing and advertising, so this should be pretty easy. Um, or so I thought, but it was 6 months before we paid ourselves. That was the time limit I gave. And it's always just really been getting people in that right job for the right price, because that was something that I always did for myself. You run into a lot of situations where, people want to get everything at a discount, but I got really good at negotiating and finding jobs and things like that. So I just started doing it for other people.
So that's really interesting for me because we continue to deal with the quote starving artist
Mm-hmm.
and artists not getting paid what they're worth and people not understanding that when you say I'm an artist or a creative, oftentimes to many who are not in that sector, and even some who are, they think that equals like zero or little pay.
Correct.
How did you get good at negotiating, not only for yourself, but for those that you represented?
It's a lot of repeating, this is this person's job. This is how they make a living. This is how I make a living. This is, you know, people are very talented and they deserve to be paid for what they're worth. And we, at the very beginning, would have to work with people that said, well, here's the budget. And I said, well, here's what you can get for that budget. But if you pay a little more, you could get somebody that's really awesome. And it reminds me a lot of House Hunters or something, that, TV show where they get to see three houses. We send people through resumes. And it's like, well, here's one you can afford, but for a little bit more, you can get everything you want. It's the same sort of principle. We would just show other people what they would get for that amount. And I think sometimes too, you have to kind of do that as an advocate for yourself and say, you can get somebody to do this for free if that's what you're looking for. I can connect you with somebody that can do this, maybe for their portfolio because they need work. But honestly, I would never pass somebody on for free. But here's the quality you're going to get for this price. And you have to get really good at saying no in some cases. There are some great designers that I know that I've run into. They're totally worth it. And if you want a logo that looks this good, or if you want a website that looks spectacular, it costs money. And it's a little different when it comes in that realm versus like true art forms. Like, I shouldn't say true art forms, but you know what I mean, like fine art forms, because you dance because you love it, or you paint because it's a hobby. And it's really starting my next thing I'd like to do is trying to get, that stigma taken away, because I'm now back into painting and things like that. And that's a little bit how we started having these explosive conversations where it's like, you know what, these people are trying to make a living too, and they are talented. And you could say, oh, I could totally paint that, but you know what, you didn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I get away from arts for art's sake, especially when it comes for funding. And I say it's arts for outcomes. Like we
Right.
really need to focus on what the arts provides and the public value that everyone gets from the arts, whether directly or indirectly, because it
Right.
uplifts all communities. And I say that artists are the truest form of entrepreneurs. And it's
Oh my
funny
gosh, yes.
when I've done work on campus, and I hear the arts department or the arts management program say, well, we have to use the word arts management, arts entrepreneur. We can't just say arts management entrepreneur because the business school says that they own the word entrepreneur, which is funny, but you're an entrepreneur and you're an artist. And I think, where did you get the guts and the courage to take your talent and go out and open a business that was 100% about supporting creatives and getting them good paying jobs?
The scrappiest people are artists, are creative thinkers for sure. And the creative people come up with these crazy ass ideas and then they make them innovative. And that's a bit about what my podcast is about. And it's exactly that. It's like, somebody who I saw a show recently that I was at a studio or like at a gallery, and it was basically stuff made out of junk. For if you want to just do the bare bones of it. But somebody saw something in that junk that said, I'm going to make this look really cool. And they did. They were able to succeed. And more than likely, that person did not have a lot of money, but they saw something that they could create with. And it's no different than being an entrepreneur, where you really start with nothing and you just get scrappy and figuring out how you're going to create something out of nothing. And that's why I always think like that element is so important in business. But, artists are like some of the scrappiest people you can have. And I've always kind of been doing that. It's like, I can figure this out. Used to putting your IKEA furniture together, and because you can kind of see the end result before you even open the box, or in a big pile of, the pressed wood and stuff like that. And you just kind of see the outcome and you just reverse engineer it in everything. But yeah, there's something about creative people, like I said, that can see what they want and they are just really good at kind of getting to it, and super resourceful and all that sort of stuff too. They just
Problem
get something out of
solvers.
nothing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I often say that to be innovative, you have to be creative. Edison was a creative. The Wright brothers were creative. Henry Ford was a creative. All of those people that are renowned for innovating and innovation, that you don't get that unless you can wonder and think outside the box or see something beyond what exists.
Exactly.
You mentioned your podcast called it's called The Secret Art of Business.
Correct.
Here again, you're like ahead of the curve coming out with a podcast. What motivated you to start that? And tell me a little bit about what you've gained from doing that. Have you learned anything from it?
Yeah, it was something that I was kind of tickling in my brain for a while. It's like, well, what if successful people are really just good at the whole left brain, right brain thing? And that kind of stemmed from people like yourself asking me, well, how the hell did you have a business for 20 years based on being an artist, essentially? And like I said, it was just like really that whole brain thinking sort of thing. You can't just be creative and just expect something to grow out of nothing. And a little bit came from just my experiences with other entrepreneurs, where everybody wanted to do the selling and nobody wanted to do the back end work. But you have to be kind of good at both in order to get the business to move forward. And it's essentially that formula. If you can exercise both sides of your brain, everybody from bankers to CEOs to pure artists that have been successful have all taken that creativity and plugged it into some sort of innovation, some sort of story that they start to build about themselves. And it just starts blossoming and taking shape. And I thought, if I could start talking to some people about this and see if I'm right kind of in this theory, that would be awesome. And I love talking to people too. I love hearing everybody's backstory. And, one of the things I like to ask them is, their journey and how they got there, starting from when they were a kid. And a lot of the stuff that they were really excited about as a child really carried over into what they were doing as an adult. It was that passion that just kept blossoming and growing, and they had more creativity to it. They somehow figured out, like for me, I was an artist, but I figured out how to get into marketing. I knew how to use a Mac. Okay, it can't be that hard from here. I'll just figure it out, And it's those sort of calculated risks that people take because they just are so sure they can just figure it out.
Yeah. So speaking of podcasts, mine is called Arts Redefined because as you and I've talked about many times, I'm on this mission to redefine the arts, where when you hear of the arts or think of the arts, you don't think of it as something frivolous and an extra, but really it's something that's foundational, that as a society as a whole, we need the arts in every truest form. Can you share with me how you define the arts or how you would advise someone who says, I'm not creative or I don't get the arts. It has nothing to do with me. How would you define that?
Love that. I love that because when you break it down to brass tacks, you have two sides of your brain. One is very creative. And this is, simply put, one side is very creative and one side is very logical. And we spend most of our day on that logical side for a lot of reasons because of, how society conditions us, like don't waste your time drawing things or, taking walks and taking pictures and doing fun things because you should be working. That's the American way. You're a hard worker. You work hard. You'll get what you want. But while we've done that, we have eliminated a lot of the creativity that we're really born to have. I mean, like I said, it's like using only half of your brain or trying to get up from a chair with one leg. It's a lot harder if you use both legs, or a lot easier if you use both legs versus just trying to use one. So use your whole brain to get ahead is basically the idea behind this. But I think that, for example, when you were talking about how people say they're not creative, I always ask them what they did as a kid because that was a time where we had no responsibility. That was a time before we were told, when you're old enough, you better go out and get a job sort of thing. And it's really, really simple stuff. Like people would just play act or they would sing into the hairbrush or they would draw or they would Legos and, Play-Doh and all sorts of things. And then something that was all taken away. I'm challenging people to go back to that just to kind of re-spark that creativity. Remember what it was to play or to just create something is probably a better word. Or sit on a swing and just think and look at the sky and what do you see? And I mean, those are the things we would spend hours doing. And that's what kept us excited and alive. And to give that up, that means you're only living half your life for one. But the example I like to use a lot is with the pandemic, all of that creativity was gone. The theaters were closed. The writers were gone. We were all watching Tiger King because there was really nothing else on that was new because nobody was working. And I mean, that's a little shameful. I look back at that now, I'm like, oh my God, that was our entertainment.
I forgot about that. Yes.
Well, when you think about it, everything that we do that gets us excited. And I mean, I'll use just, somebody's like, well, I'm a real sports person. Well, what do you like in sports? They have uniforms that were designed by designers. The music is pumped into the stadium to jazz you up. That's all written by somebody. There's lighting and there's the cheerleaders and that's all choreography and things like that. Those are all things that imagine if it was gone, would the game be even fun anymore? You would hear just, the squeaking of the shoes, or you would just, people running around on the, sliding around on the ice, but there's no Jumbotron. There's no, any of that stuff. And all of that and there's people who think about how do we make this more exciting for people? That's all creativity. So imagine all of that gone and imagine, like the people that write books, all your favorite audiobooks or actual books. I mean, all the stories that would be missed. And people love stories like in the summer because they get to, sneak away and just experience something else. And there's TV. I mean, all that sort of stuff. And even if you go to the art museum too, where people will go in and look and just how do you really feel when you're around that sort of stuff? It's so emotionally driven, so creatively driven. You might want to go home and say, oh, I saw that painting and you know what? I could totally do that. And you hear that a lot. But then maybe somebody might try to do it. Well, it might not be the same or even good, but you tried it and it's fun.
One thing that I think about, and I agree with you, but I also, in the back of my head, because I didn't come from an artistic background. I came from a, political reporter background, but I've always had a passion for the creatives. But, I think about, and I think of then public officials, elected officials that I talk to about the arts and say, gosh, what if it all went away? Knowing that it's not going to all go away, right? It's not. But what I want to focus on is I think back to when I graduated high school, STEM wasn't really a thing. There was still the liberal arts degree. There was still that whole well-rounded, you had different bachelors that you went into.
Right.
And then when I started covering politics, in particular state politics, all of a sudden there became, in the 90s, these standardized tests and laws being passed that we've got to graduate everyone. And all of a sudden STEM started becoming this predominant conversation, which then arts became more and more in the background. So what I like to look at is not that it's going to go away, but how are we as a society, how are we as inventors, as a prosperous leaders in the world in industry or manufacturing or medicine or science, how can we excel when we don't foster and train that creative side, which is what I'm hearing you say are all of these touch points when we were growing up. We were allowed to do those creative, nondescript wondering. What is it about that you see as a trained artist that by stripping away what you learned in school, are we missing? Meaning, I guess I'm getting at cross-disciplinary, like the arts need to be infused into every part of education.
Right. And I don't know if the word the arts is the stigma, maybe, but which is why I always talk about creativity and innovation and then branch it out into what that actually means. And the thing, and I've talked to a fair amount of CEOs now that know that creativity is how you grow business. I mean, when you think about Steve Jobs, for example, he could have made another phone, he could have made a phone that was portable and whatever, or just Mac in general, we'll just say. But he was the one that made it an emotional experience. If you think about when you get a fresh Mac and you open that box and it is just this feeling of euphoria that you get, and all the corners are curved and it makes a cute little tone when you turn it on. I mean, that's all the showmanship of that. And it's the innovation. And it is completely unsurpassed by anybody else because he just figured out that it's more than just it functioning. It's got to be an experience. And that's where a lot of creativity comes from. That experience, that leveling up and innovation that is always going to keep things ahead of the game. And the one thing that I think that people forgot too is that the world still looks to America to be the innovators. We have invented so many things. And granted, sometimes they get ripped off or somebody does another version of it, but it's usually America that comes up with these ideas. And one of these conversations I had with someone who was from another country said, well, if America stops making ideas, where are the ideas going to come from? So I think we can have a lot of pride in saying, you know what, if we invest in this area, if we really foster this creativity on any level, and maybe it's a matter of you got a business class, but you know what, you're also going to sign up for painting or something else because we need to have whole brain thinkers in CEO roles or something, or people can do that on their own too, obviously. But what if school decided it was important again to get all of the whole brain working on all of these things just to help with innovation and creativity because the future needs to have better ideas, better thoughts, and a better innovation. But it's been proven time and time again. I mean, Bill Gates is another one where, everybody suddenly has a computer on their desk and, it just really just kind of goes on and on. And, we mentioned Henry Ford just says, and it's like, oh my God, imagine if you could ride in something that didn't even need a horse. Oh my God. It's stuff that people would have never thought of. Computers in pockets and, horseless carriages and all these sort of things. That's all American ingenuity. And we're falling short in that regard because now we're making, basically generating a bunch of doers and not a bunch of thinkers. And we do need to bring that back in some form in order for people to stay ahead of the game, stay ahead of the rest of the world.
Yeah, for sure. So transitioning to your role as a board member, you serve on a lot of nonprofit arts boards. Have you been surprised by anything by being a board member for a nonprofit arts organization?
I guess the one thing that still resonates is that people will see, that whole starving artist syndrome, that giving to the arts, you're really kind of doing a favor for people versus in really investing in the community or in the future. But then again, how close that marriage is between money, business, and the arts, and that it does work if you can somehow prove that there's profit involved in it. Like, for example, if you have a strong theater community, that's going to increase the population in your area, which means you can charge more for taxes, which means, that we're going to have, better roads and better whatever. But you have to always draw the line between the two dots, because most of the time people just don't see it. But in order to, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with this. I think it's just more artists speaking up on their own value to what they're contributing. People will talk about gallery walks and things like that, and how that makes a community, and how the opera makes a community, and but then sports too. I see that as an expression of creativity versus it necessarily being a business, but you involve the business people, and next thing you know, you're making a ton of money. So there is a bit of a marriage there between the two, and the best way to advocate for the arts is to show that it can make money. I'm on a board for an art college, and it's always a matter of, if I send my kid here, are they going to be able to make a living? They just did re-engage all their graduates. Hey, let's talk about the jobs you have. And we're going to tell the parents that, you can be successful with an art degree, but there's still a little bit of that stigma. But I think the faster we keep talking about how the two can actually, business and the arts and money and all of that can be married together, suddenly you have everybody's attention.
Any advice that you have for someone who is a leader of a nonprofit arts organization and looking for strong board representation? What advice would you give them on how to form or, get the most efficiency out of a board to help support the mission?
Find the people that are really passionate about the arts. I remember, and this really kind of surprised me since you brought about surprises on boards, is how many people like in CEO roles or CFO or whatever, they don't necessarily consider themselves creative, but they love the arts and they are huge advocates for the arts. So for example, banks will sponsor free days at museums where families can go, and which is great because then kids can start young about going to the art museum. It's part of their memory track and things like that. They invite their friends to the symphony, and it's getting, really talking to some of those movers and shakers in your neighborhood, I guess, or the leaders in business, and asking them, what's your favorite kind of art? What would you be on our board? Because we could really use someone of your caliber to talk about how awesome art is. Once they start getting involved in it, the fever starts catching up, and they start doing great things with contributions and things like that. So I think you need to also have, a range of artists that can speak for the artists. You need to have people that are like in middle management that are the ones that maybe are going regularly or have kids or things like that. But some of those higher level people are kind of key because people look up to them. They can get their companies involved, and they sometimes will have more time to do it too, be perfectly honest, rather than somebody else doing it as well. But it is, and then also too, try and make it as little work for them as possible. I know there are a lot of boards that are working boards, but if you can even get an assistant that can help so they're not doing a lot of the heavy lifting, it's like, I just need you to show up. I need you to tell your friends. I need you to literally write the checks. I need you to do things like that. But to have some sort of engagement like that would probably be my best advice. All people are important, but the people that can move mountains are really key.
Yeah, that's all great advice. So I am starting a new segment to close out the podcast, and I'm calling it the Color Connection.
Okay.
What color do you love most and why?
You can't ask artists that because they love so many colors, but probably the ones behind me are like my two favorites, but I'm really
You have to pick one.
I'm really hot into orange right now.
Okay, well, that's a good thing because you said right now. One of my questions is, has your favorite color changed over the years? And apparently it has. What color did you love the most as a child?
Oh, it was probably purple.
Why?
This just was something, just felt like the most creative color out there. It was, just kind of magical and probably spoke the most about my personality. It was just not your typical blue or red or something like that, but it was a combination of the two. And it was, I don't know, just felt like super, super creative. It made me happy, I just love purple.
So when you say most like your personality, how would you describe the personality of purple?
Purple is always happy and fun. It gets along well with others. I don't know. It's a little unexpected, I guess. Not necessarily the safest color. Purple spoke to me a lot because I really wanted, creativity was my ultimate driver. And again, while, like I said, purple kind of gets along with everyone, orange is a little different. Orange is a little more fiery. It's a little more bold. It's, in your face, you can't help but see it. It even elevates, I think, higher than a red. So I think with that, my personality has changed. I have done the creative look at me sort of route, but then now I have found my voice and a little more of this drive and excitement inside me. So orange is the color right now.
That's great. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for your time. Catherine has the podcast, The Secret Art of Business, which we will link that below in the show notes, as well as her bio, a brief bio for her, and contact information if you want to reach out and perhaps be a guest on The Secret Art of Business.
Love it.
I'm sure you would love to entertain that.
Yes.
Catherine, thank you so much for joining me today.
My absolute pleasure.